Good morning, everyone.
Hi, I'm Arifah Aziz.
I'm Astria Amin.
I'm Tang Tsiao Yin.
I'm NorShamimie.
Today, we are going to discuss the last topic, the themes and symbolism in What Sargasso See. First of all, let's watch the trailer.
He came from the cold north of England to the wild tropical splendor of Jamaica to marry a woman he knew nothing about. From the world-renowned novel by Jean Rhys, Wide Sargasso Sea, an extraordinary new motion picture. A masterpiece of love and betrayal. A world of passion and sensuality. An unforgettable story of sexual obsession. Wide Sargasso Sea.
Okay, the first theme in this novel is alienation and otherness. This story is set in early 19th in Jamaica. The racial hierarchy is shown as complex, with tension between white-born in England, Creole people, black ex-slave, and people of mixed race. So the resentment between this group leads to hatred and violence. So the protagonist of this story, Antoinette, is discarded by both the black Caribbean as well as the white English society. Thus, this forced her to see herself as the other in terms of race. Even in the opening of this novel, she mentioned that they say when trouble comes close friend, and so the white people did, but we were not in their rank.
My mother's Frenchness and her irrepressible
Antoinette and her family, though white, do not belong to the dominant class of white Jamaican for many reasons, including local disapproval of her mother, Annette's Causeway's behavior, appearances, French origins, as well as the family's poverty after the death of Antoinette's father, who is Alexander Causeway. Apart from alienation from the white English society, Antoinette Causeway and her family are also discarded from the black Caribbean. This situation is clearly and repeatedly being portrayed throughout this novel. The black population call Antoinette and her family as white cockroaches to show their hatred and resentment toward her and her family. For the other characters in this novel, such as Christophine and Daniel Causeway, they are also being alienated in this novel. Christophine is Antoinette's blackness, although she is black, but she is a native of Martinique. So Christophine is set apart from the other black people of the region because of her different physical features and clothing. As Antoinette described, Christopher's physical features and clothing are different from the other black women because she was much blacker, blue-black with a thin face and straight features. She wore a black dress, heavy gold earring, and a yellow handkerchief, carefully tied with the two high points in front. No other Negro woman wore black or tied her handkerchief Martinique fashion. Meanwhile, Daniel Causeway, the mixed race, because he is the illegitimate child of Alexander Causeway with one of his black slaves, also suffers from exclusion. He is alienated from the Causeway family. So According to Daniel in his letter for Rochester, he mentioned that the Causeway family discarded him because they are white, I am colored. They are rich, I am poor.
The second theme in the White Sargasso Sea is slavery and freedom. At the start of the novel, we see that the Emancipation Act of 1833 leaves discontent and violence in its wake. Mr. Luttrell, a white former slave owner and neighbor to the Causeways, commits suicide in the wake of emancipation, unable to adjust to the new social and economic landscape. At Colibri, the local population of black former slaves is deeply angry. Even though slavery had been officially abolished, the bondage imposed by dependency became like slavery to ex-slaves and women alike. The hostility between ex-slave servants and their white employers escalated as the relationship changed from legal ownership to financial dependence, a figurative slavery. The fire at Colibri illustrates this resentment of the black workers against the exploitative whites dramatically. Even if it is violent and ultimately tragic, freedom is shown to be inevitable, the necessary path to redemption in the novel on both a social and personal level. Oppression and imprisonment are unsustainable. Antoinette ends the novel and her life by setting fire to the house in which she is imprisoned by Rochester. Her narration ends with sense of purpose and self-knowledge that she lacked in the rest of the novel. In reference to her own emancipating destruction, at the end of the novel she says, "Now at last I know why I was brought here and what I have to do." This fire connects her to the angry mob that in an act of protest against their own oppression.
The next theme highlighted in White Sargasso Sea is oppression and victimization of female gender. According to Bankston, oppression refers to both the system of obstacles and the individual acts that maintain the privilege and authority of the dominant group. In the novel, we discover that women are oppressed not only by men but also by the society. The poor women in the novel are subordinated and marginalized. First of all, we'll look into Antoinette's mother, Annette. Annette faces multiple alienation. Being a poor Martinique girl, she is being disapproved of and ostracized by white Jamaican women because of her beauty and her outsider status. She is hated because she is a former slave owner. After the death of her husband, Annette can only survive by marrying again to Mr. Mason. However, she is not being well taken care of by Mr. Mason. After the fire and also the death of her son, Pierre, Mr. Mason leaves Annette in the care of a black couple who oppress her and repeatedly humiliate her and mock her condition. Next, we see Antoinette. Antoinette is being oppressed by her husband, Rochester. Not knowing much about Antoinette and her background, Rochester agrees to marry Antoinette because due to the considerable amount of money Antoinette's father-in-law is willing to pay to him. As he mentioned in the novel, the £30,000 were being paid to him without questions or condition. During the honeymoon in Massacre, the husband progressively refashioned Antoinette into a raving woman. He makes love with Antoinette and exploits her sexual desire, but he has no feeling towards her at all. Rochester makes Antoinette totally indulge in making sex with him, but rejects her totally in order to gain control over her. This causes This causes Antoinette to approach Christophine to ask for a love potion which can make Rochester falls in love with her again. Also, Rochester oppresses his wife by changing her name from Antoinette, a French name, into Bertha. He says, "Good night, Bertha. I hope you sleep well, Bertha. Don't laugh like that, Bertha." Matt Lloyd in 2000 claims that the names are often central to our sense of identity. Renaming Antoinette is a notion of colonization of Antoinette by Rochester. Rochester locks Antoinette in the attics of the house in England. As Antoinette grows more and more unstable, Rochester simply claims that she is mad, which in turn gives him more power to rule over her. We can say that the life of Antoinette is a struggle from the very beginning of the novel until the end. On the other hand, Christophine possesses strength that Antoinette and her mother lack. It is portrayed that she is in a sense more free to control her own life. When Antoinette cannot stand up against her husband Rochester's abusive behavior, Christophine takes Antoinette's side and she is there to confront Rochester. Christophine's position as a Martinique Aubert woman grants her rank and status, not only with the black characters of the novel, but also with the local girls, which includes Emily.
Alright, moving on to the next theme. The theme that I will be talking about is sexual manipulation. Antoinette and Rochester's marriage is not formed on an equal footing. Rochester, being a white Englishman, naturally exercised power over Antoinette, and he, in that position, attempts to use his advantage in areas not rightly his to control. For instance, Rochester has the legal rights over all of Antoinette's inheritance and lands. In this marriage, Antoinette is the subordinate one and therefore she attempts to balance the disparity by initiating a sexual component into the relationship. She uses her sexuality as a weapon. In the novel, she is shown as a kind of woman who revels in the pleasure of wild and released sensuality. She knows her sensuality. Let's have a look at this. In this novel, she is also guilty for letting Rochester to manipulate her desire, and it seems like she herself really enjoyed it. Please refer to the video clip.
If I could die now, when I'm happy, you wouldn't have to kill me. Just say it. Try. Say, die and watch me die.
Die then. Die. Die.
Rochester, on the other hand, attempts to use a superior position to obtain sexual favor from the subordinate, Antoinette. He has no concern for the best interests of Antoinette.
I think the first symbolism in the novel is the title White Sargasso Sea. Why? I think White Sargasso Sea is a very good title for the novel as it symbolizes the differences between the two characters, Antoinette and Rochester, who come from different backgrounds. The Sargasso is a sea of the size of the United States. By definition, the inhabitants are headless wayfarers, often plants torn away from their habitats by storms and drift northward, just like Antoinette. She is torn away by Rochester, where curious things happen to her, and she is so bewildered and lost that by the end she does not recognize nor believe that she is truly in England. The animal trapped in White Sargasso Sea are typically poor swimmers, which ultimately must cling to the weak in order to receive any kind of support. This is a perfect metaphor for Antoinette, as she could have survived on her own, but once she married to Rochester, she loses all her property as it become Rochester's. And then she must cling to him in order to have any money or property. Finally, she has no roots or hold fast for attachment and must find herself essentially alone and active. However, her general resoluteness allows her to live for some years, much like some individuals' plants trapped in the sea. Ultimately, though, her endless drifting leads her to complete loss of sanity, and eventually she commits suicide.
The symbolism that I found from this novel is white cockroach. I think white cockroach is the representation of the question of national identity. That is, how do we determine who belong in a country? Is it determined by race? Does whoever lives there first get the first dibs? Then, neither the black or the white can lay claim to the islands because the Caribbeans and the others indigenous tribes actually preceded them.
Did you hear what the girl was singing? White cockroach. That's me. That's what they call all of us who were here before their own people sold them to the slave traders.
Antoinette's musings here could indirectly explain why white Creoles or white cockroach attracts so much abuse. Their liminal status as not quite white and not quite black undercuts the claim that either the race deserves to call the island exclusively theirs.
Next symbolism is fire. Fire is the ultimate destructive and redemptive force in the novel. The fire at Calibri is an act of retribution and defiance on the part of the nearby black community, but it destroys the life that Antoinette has known as a child. Both Coco the parrot and the moth that fly into flame of candles throughout the Antoinette's and the husband's honeymoon foreshadow Antoinette's own fiery suicide, through which she finally gains freedom at the end of the novel. We can also compare the difference between how the symbolism of fire distinguishes the representation of Jane and Antoinette's character. Rochester describes the West Indies as fiery, and we see his dislike of this unfamiliar environment grow to overpowering proportions until he decides to shoot himself. He is prevented by a fresh wind from Europe, which entices him home. Bertha's fury, hateful and wild nature, is the opposite of Jane's and typically English reserve. Fire also links Jane to Bertha, both in passion and in the actual setting of fire. Most notably the fire that kills Bertha, but symbolizes rebirth in the character of Rochester.
Okay, the next symbolism is clothing and hair. In this novel, the state of women's dresses and hair represent their desirability as well as their mental state. Annette's effort to improve the life of the family begins with the making of new dresses for herself and Anthony. These new dresses symbolizes the beginning of their new life. For Antoinette, red dress symbolizes her identity. When she thinks someone has taken her red dress, she feels they have taken her identity. This happens when her cousin comes to see her and he does not recognize her. Okay, on the other hand, hair is used to symbolize the woman's mental or emotional state. Plaited, coiled, brushed or otherwise type of hair is symbolic of a woman's stable mental state. Meanwhile, unmanaged or undone hair is symbolic of a woman's mental instability. For example, when Antoinette sees her mother, she thinks she was dressed but she had not put up her hair and one of her plaits was loose. So the one loose plate reveals a loosening in her mother's composure, meaning that she had lost her mind.